Hello there. Well, here it is, Friday, another Anomaly day. This one comes from very, very early in my career, and it is a difficult one for me to revisit because I've gone out of my way to try to purge it from my memory. It was pretty rough. And it has to do with a company that was selling this program to schools across America. It was a program about effective teaching, and they had some sort of an acronym for it, some sort of set of words for it, but they called it for short EEEI, Effective Elements of Education, or something like that. Anyway, EEEI, the first time I even heard it, I thought of Beethoven's Fifth, da 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 da, EEEI. And of course, Beethoven's Fifth is his imagining of death knocking on the door. And perhaps I was prescient in my reaction to EEEI, because I was in the second group that was invited to participate in my district. So the whole district was to take part of it. It was a thing they paid for these presenters to come in. And it was the first place that I learned, first of all, that anybody who is trying to develop a program to improve student learning is not. Okay? They're trying to sell something. They're trying to grease themselves with some sort of political movement. They're trying all sorts of stuff, but student improvement is not of interest to them. Don't buy it. Because quite frankly, it's not the only time that I was introduced to this kind of orthodoxy. All these programs, they develop these orthodoxies where everybody has to do everything the same way at the same time, thinking that that is education. It's not. And anybody who is a genuine scholar knows it's not. All right? Things that are great, that are powerful, and that are important for learning, students discover those, teachers discover those. And those practices, they come from long, slogging work with trying to learn stuff. And there are innovations that come along, but they're free to everybody. The first man who read silently, he didn't do it to make money, he didn't do it to make his identity known, he did it because it worked for him. Okay? That's the thing. If you find somebody peddling some sort of program to improve student learning, be very suspicious, because that's not how it works. All right? That's just not how it works. It shouldn't cost you things to find out a good way to learn things. Okay? It shouldn't cost you that. The thing that costs you is going in and doing the work and learning. And sure, there are tricks involved in learning things, for sure. Mnemonics, memory devices, yep, that's a great learning technique. Shaping, yep, that's a great training technique. Those all come with an education, and you do pay for an education, oftentimes with money and your precious time. But if some outsider is going to come in and tell you how to make your students perform, and is going to charge you money for that, or is going to grease themselves politically with that, get your radar out, because it's a load of hooey. This program, this EEEI, was based on ideas presented by Madeline Hunter. Now, you can look her up. She's sort of a famous educational person, and she has a lot of good educational ideas. But the people who were peddling this program, it wasn't really about looking at her ideas. It was about selling a concept. And the people that were presenting really didn't know about teaching. They only presented to teachers. They never presented to students. They weren't longtime teachers. They were former teachers who quit after a couple years and went and found this gig. They became consultants, and that means they didn't teach SWAT. So I'm going to go into what happened. I'm a deep believer in student participation. Anybody who's had class with me knows that I'm a deep believer in this. And I believe that students do learn by doing. There's no question of that. I've always believed that. Here's the problem with the Madeline Hunter program that came in. We came to a point where they said, you need to make sure that when you give an instruction, you give it to every student. Don't just give an instruction. Don't say, take out your notebooks. Say, everyone, take out your notebooks. Say, everybody, turn to page 12. Never just say, turn to page 12, because students will assume they're not talking to you, or they're not being spoken to directly. Students will assume if you don't say everyone, you don't mean everyone. This is what they said to us. And at first I was like, okay, I understand what you're saying. You want to make sure that everybody's participating. That's right. That's a good idea. But couldn't you just say, now, folks, today, every instruction I give is for everybody in the room, so we're all going to do it together. Couldn't you just start the class like that and not say everyone over and over again? Guess what the answer was? No. You couldn't start the class by saying, look, what we're going to do today, I want everybody to participate in. You couldn't start the class that way. You had to do it on every single instruction. That is bull. It is illogical to assume that there's any magic word. Even please and thank you are not magical, okay? And when I suggested this in our first presentation with this, I was really trying to be cooperative. I was saying, look, you must be yourself, you must speak as yourself, but it's a good idea to remind yourself that you want everyone, and to remind them that you want everyone in the classroom participating, that we all should join in. But no, they weren't having it. They were determined, these presenters were determined to make me say yes, everyone, every time, everybody, every time. And something in my rebellious little soul said, no, I am not agreeing to that. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Now, lots of people in the room thought that too, but guess what they didn't do, because they're not like me? They didn't say so. They just went, sure, okay, fine. They were already taking this suggestion, crumpling up and throwing it away. And if the presenters had gone ahead and said, you know what, you're right, you should be able to develop your materials in a way that you think will work best for your students, and as long as you monitor and make sure that they're participating, then it should be fine, okay? That's what they should have said, and in fact, I would bet you money that Madeline Hunter would have said that, but they weren't Madeline Hunter. They were supporting Madeline Hunter's ideas. In other words, they weren't even innovative enough to come up with their own program. They were just stealing stuff and then presenting it as if it were the ultimate authority. Another red flag. Anytime anybody tells you that every teacher should be doing the same thing on a particular day with every student is wrong. They're wrong. Students and teachers have to develop their material cooperatively, and they have to respond to each other cooperatively, and that variation is part of what makes education powerful. That variation is part of what makes it possible for us to make discoveries of all sorts of different kinds by following our own inclinations and finding ways to learn and teach that work well for groups. And the thing is, we all know this. We all know that all of us are capable of learning physically, with our eyes, with our ears, and even with our chemical senses like taste and smell. We're capable of learning with all of those, but we also know that our tendencies are in different directions. Some people are very good at the visual stuff. Some people are better at the auditory stuff. To assume all teachers and all learners are exactly the same, like machines, is obscene and wrong, and shows that anybody that thinks that's the way it works is either a fool or lying. There are people out there around in this world for years who have wanted public education to fail because they don't like it when people who aren't wealthy get a wealth of information and learning at school. That is what they object to. They object to poor people being able to compete with rich people. That's what really bothers them. And that's why they don't want their kids going to public school. And I know this because Mother talked to a very nice Christian lady who said to her, look, we know that there's better teaching going on in the public schools, but we really don't want our children around those people. Those people? Shut up. Those people are Americans. And part of what we're supposed to be doing as Americans is valuing individuals, the individual right, the individual freedom, and the individual ability to contribute to society. And assuming there's only one way to do that is foolish and destructive. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Sorry. So, back to EEEI. It started to affect me emotionally. I didn't ever want to go to training sessions because they were so determined to force us to do things a certain way, only the way they wanted it done, that it got to where I felt sick the day before we had training, and I would feel sick the whole day they were there. So finally, after talking to Mother and after praying about it for a long time, I called up and said I needed to quit EEEI. Now, I knew other people had, because I'd seen them. They were there and then they weren't. When I asked, they said I couldn't. I said, what? No, you can't. Why? Well, you're a leader in this community, and so you need to stay in. Otherwise, it might lose support. So let me get this straight. You think you own me. You think I owe you my nature. I'm telling you right now, that was the day I decided I was going to graduate school. That was the day. Because I knew that if they wouldn't let me out of that teacher training system, it would eventually send me out of the profession. And you know what? I didn't want to go out of the profession. Now, every other day of the week I might have, but the very fact that they were ready to try to use me as a pawn in some sort of ridiculous game having to do with marketing their stupid stuff made me furious. And so I applied to graduate school, and I got in. So was this bad or good? Was this a bad experience or a good experience? Suddenly feel like Hamlet. No, not really. Well, that's it for today. The Orthodoxy Anomaly. And I hope you have a glorious rest of the day. And I hope you see me soon. You gorgeous people.